hosting session on Science, Technology, Innovation Policy 2020. It's a very special session for us, also for everyone who joined. It's a dedicated session to discuss issues, ideas, concerns, and like more of to discuss some of the pressing issues that we have with respect to our young scholars, PhDs, postdocs, and early career researchers, and how to kind of take it up and address them in the ongoing policy making process. And we are really glad that we have with us today Professor VijayRaghavan and Dr. Akhilesh Gupta from STIP 2020 Secretariat joining to this session. Professor VijayRaghavan will be online any moment. He'll be just coming online in 1 or 2 minutes from now. We will start with the session, and let me begin with some quick housekeeping rules and some instructions for both our panelists and for our audience who are present in YouTube and other live social media channels. The first thing to note is this session is live streaming in YouTube. There is a single source live streaming. I guess most of us are already there on that live stream session. In the comment section, make sure that you keep engaging, sharing your thoughts and ideas and questions so that our moderators on YouTube will make sure that those are taken into this discussion directly. On social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, we have our social media moderators there as well. Wherever you want to ask your questions, put your ideas and thoughts, use the hashtag STIP 2020 with young scholars. I repeat, hashtag STIP 2020 with young scholars. When you use this hashtag, it would be easier for our social media moderators to directly curate those comments and questions and bring it up to this online session. With that, let me again have a warm, let me again welcome all of you. And this session is going to be very free-flowing and open-ended. Although we aim to come to some kind of a summary and way forward at the end of this session. So tune in till the end of this session so that we know what the session is going to bring out both for this policy and for the people who are engaged in this policy exercise. With that, let me also introduce our main moderators for today's session, very individuals who are trying to build a community of young researchers and build a network of activities around issues of young researchers to help them with career building, help them with so many other early career researcher related career prospects. We have with us Aditya Parikh from NCBS, who will be moderating this session and putting out questions and comments on call. With Aditya, we have Gauri, who will also be listing down some of the existing recommendations and points that have come out from a previous National Postdoctoral Symposium and through other platforms, such as there were some focused discussions on how do we actually enrich the early career researchers ecosystem, how to build this critical human resource for the future STA ecosystem. I think we are looking forward to those recommendations as well. So it is not something that we are only going to discuss points today. It's a culmination of what has happened so far and what everybody else said so far in the context of early career researchers. With that, we also have our on-call social media moderators. Sri Divya, who will be moderating along with the other Divya from Science Policy Forum on YouTube. And we have Ms. Amrita Mukherjee moderating on social media platform. We also have Janice trying to live tweet every discussion and points that are going to come out. And we have Sheshta Mandal, who will be summarizing this entire discussion and possibly come up with a summary to get into the policy. So with that, a quick housekeeping instruction. I request the on-call panelists and moderators to keep their microphones muted all the time, but they're speaking. And keep your video on whenever you are speaking or all the time. If your video is wobbly, we are not able to hear you properly, please make sure that you switch off the video and start speaking at that time so that we save some bandwidth. One more thing, if you have anything to interrupt during some ongoing discussion, there is a hand raise option. Please make sure that you locate them right away, and then you can use those hand raise options so that I get an interruption to take you your interventions right there. With that, I guess we are good to go. let me quickly call upon the first moderator for this session, Ms. Gauri, and Dr. Gauri. She's a postdoc. And I'll request her to start the session with introductory remarks, starting by Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, and then we'll move on to Professor VijayRaghavan when he joins. Over to you, Gauri.
Thank you for opening this event, Shankar. The young research scholars nationwide are really excited about this opportunity and have been pouring their questions, ideas, concerns, and suggestions for discussion with these two experts. I request Dr. Akhilesh Gupta to say a few words to the young scholars before we proceed to discussing the key points. We will have Professor VijayRaghavan joining us afterwards, and then we will have the discussion on the key points collated from the discussions of third National Postdoctoral Symposium and social media platform. Now I request Dr. Akhilesh Gupta to give an introductory remark.
Thank you, Gauri, and very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And let me welcome the doctoral, postdoctoral, early research scientists, and other constituents who are joining today from across the world, not just from India. Let me also welcome my team here from Head-STIP 2020 and also the other participants joining today. This is a very special featured session, especially organized for...
So you do that when Dennis gives us a go-ahead, right?
1 second. All right, we are live.
Extremely sorry for the technical issue in between. I invite Dr. Akhilesh Gupta once again and to give his introductory remarks. Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you, Gauri. I think very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Let me welcome all of you joining from not just from India, from different parts of the world. This is going to be a very special featured session.
Dr. Gupta, you have to mute your audio. I think if anybody has the YouTube open, please stop their YouTube or mute them.
Carry on, Akhilesh.
Okay, so this session is going to be, in fact, very different from the usual session. This is especially organized for the doctoral, postdoctoral, and early career scientists of the country, not just the country, but also outside the country. As you know, there have been 4 science policies prepared in the past, post-independence. This is Science Policy Resolution of 1958, Technology Policy Statement of 1983, Science and Technology Policy of 2003, and Science and Technology Innovation Policy of 2013. But what is unique about the policy that we are making now is that it's going to be decentralized, bottom-up, expert-driven, evidence-supported, and bottom-up inclusive. And in fact, the entire policy formulation process has been divided into 4 tracks. Track 1 is a public consultation and extended expert consultation. The track 2 is a thematic group discussion, with this we are just concluded with having the consultation and final discussion in 16 groups. The track 3 is the state and the interministerial level consultation. This also we have launched and it's in midway. Track 4 is the FX level institutional consultation. In fact, track 1 is a track where you all can participate in a big way. because it has several components of your interest. For example, you can join public dialogue with thought leaders. We are going to launch very shortly. Thematic panel discussion we just concluded, but these all are available on website of the Science Policy Forum, and you can have a look at it. Target surveys, which is in all regional languages. One can give ideas and the suggestion on this. Then we also have print and electronic media. Our leaders and our writers will go to the media and write about what we are doing, and you can always participate in giving your comments and suggestions. Also, we are going to have community podcasts and Ideathon. Ideathon is a competition where you can all participate with your ideas. You can have post your posters, or you can have your videos posted on that. So we have very tight timelines. We have to finish everything within 6 months. We thought of this special session with you because we want to focus on young people who have, in fact, and we want to address the concerns of you. As the, today India has the very serious issue of the full-time equivalent researcher number, which India needs to, in fact, increase in a big way in times to come. We are open to any critical suggestions and comments coming from you. So do not hold yourself. And we have, in fact, India's topmost policy maker and science leader today, Professor VijayRaghavan. So it's a very one-time opportunity that you get to pose questions to him. We look forward to having some big questions, big out-of-box ideas from you. Thank you very much.
Now I request Professor VijayRaghavan to give his introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's an honor to have all of you here. I know it's a big period of uncertainty for you, and if it helps, it's also a period of uncertainty for everyone across the world in multiple occupations, professions, and so on. In some ways, many people say that we didn't know that this was coming, and therefore it's completely shaken up our foundations. But the important point to keep in mind is that we did know it was coming. Over decades, scientists have studied the environment, climate change, ecology, genetics, spillover from other animals to humans in terms of disease. And we've had a very good understanding of how these have happened over historical time. And we've had a good understanding of how spillovers happen. One of the characteristics of human civilizations is our ability to come together and deal with a crisis, but after the crisis is over, to forget the crisis and assume that it'll never come again. So this crisis is a wake-up call for us not to do that. And indeed, the way our science and technology community has come together in India is an example of how we can do things while working together. We have done things, our mathematicians, our astronomers, our biologists, our engineers, our physicists have done things which they 6 months ago wouldn't have dreamt that they are capable of doing or can do. They have broken the barriers imposed by difficult supply chains, difficult challenges, growing disease, and made everything from mathematical models to ventilators and everything in between. Our vaccine efforts, for example, India has been well known as a manufacturing hub for vaccine. But today, both from academia, from entrepreneurship, from small industry on one side and big industry on the other, our vaccine development and discovery efforts are just really absolutely terrific. And those again are things to be proud of. Now, in all this situation, what does the future hold for people at early stages in their career. It does seem very uncertain and very difficult, and there are many, many difficulties. I have no question about that. But, you know, by looking at the kinds of questions which you are asking in the chat channel, it's based entirely and very importantly on the kinds of aspects which you would find as immediate importance. No question about that. So we must move now from those which must be dealt with, of course, but move also to those which set the stage for your careers and your lives and your ambitions and eagerness to do science later on. Now, what are those? I'll end with this so that there's time for questions. One of the important points, as I said earlier, which the pandemic has brought out, is nature does not know the barriers between physics and chemistry and mathematics and biology and medicine and agriculture and so on and so forth. We have created all those barriers, and they're important in terms of our able to learn our disciplines well. But in terms of real world problem solving, many of these structures need to come together. And that's what we are trying to do when we deal with the pandemic. So the question is, how can we deal with this as we go forward? I know that there are many opportunities opening up in industry. They will open up as supply chains, are formed again with an anchor in India. There will be new opportunities in industry. There will be new opportunities in science and multiple other areas in government. There'll be opportunities in academic areas, both in teaching and research and in a combination. And I'm sure that this relative period of uncertainty which we're going through now will also resolve in a manner which is great value. Therefore, in that situation, science, technology, innovation policy is important because it puts in place all your thoughts and your ideas on how and what we should focus on and how we should take that into action. So I'll stop here now and look forward to your comments and questions, which I'm happy to spend some time answering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor VijayRaghavan and Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, for your introductory remarks. I now invite our co-moderator, Aditya Parekh, to join us and begin the discussion on the key collated points. We have 7 key points. Meanwhile, we encourage all the viewers who are watching us live on YouTube to actively participate in the discussion. And you can post your comments and questions in the YouTube chat section. Thank you. Over to you, Aditya.
Thanks, Gauri. Thank you all for being here. Without further ado, let me highlight the most widely suggested theme to be discussed in this event, which is career choice. I hope I am audible, right? Many of the current PhDs and postdocs are heavily skewed towards academic or research career options and are blindfolded towards other non-academic career opportunities. How can they be educated about alternative careers? What possible efforts can be taken to address this problem from the side of policy, institution, and individual? I would like Professor VijayRaghavan to share his thoughts on this. Can policy level intervention address this to some extent?
Thank you, Aditya. Absolutely. This is a very critical point. Those of you who have been undergraduates in engineering environments know how much the job visits by companies and the offices which deal with that among students are very, very important in engineering. Engineering students know through those kinds of interactions, even before they finish, what are the likely jobs they can get. There is no such program on campuses, on campus recruitment for people who are finishing their masters or their PhDs or their postdocs. Why is that? Because these were not really considered routes into industry or any other kinds of jobs. That is one reason. The timing of graduation of PhD students is distributed over the year, and the job market, as it were, was not a consolidated market. And you look at, ecological societies, evolutionary biology societies, societies of engineering, and statistics, mathematics, those people in their international meetings also have major recruitment fairs also simultaneously happening. So to sum up, what can we do? And these are no amount of sarkari work can help you do this. Institutions must get together so they have counseling departments for people at every level at a very high priority. All our national labs and our universities must have that for MSc and PhD students. And like in engineering and postdocs, and like in engineering, these should be driven bottom up, not by the bosses of your institutions. Their involvement, their support is absolutely necessary. That's one thing. Secondly, our society meetings should have meetings from industry. The Indian Society, for all the engineering societies when they meet, whether it is in terms of sensors, solid state devices, control systems, they have a large number of people from industry. The kinds of questions which we are asking here as postdocs in science or graduate students in science are not that much asked about engineering people, because in their meetings they meet people from industry a lot and they know where all they should go. So all our meetings should have people from the biotech industry and from other areas. For example, if you're a biologist, from the chemistry industry if you're a chemist, from the deep tech industry if you're an astronomer, and that should be a significant percentage. Finally, what is happening today is the design and software are becoming a key set of values for companies across the spectrum, no matter what they're doing. So we must have training in design and analysis of big data in a big way amongst the young people. That makes them valuable in any industry. You might be trained as a computational biologist, but you're valuable in the finance sector. You might be trained as a microscopist, but you could have great value in the astronomy industry. So these kinds of broader training programs within communities need to come up bottom up. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Do we think that these trainings that you were referring to can also be sort of implemented, or not implemented, but sort of suggested to universities and institutes to be a mandatory part of a PhD curriculum?
Again, I would take lessons from our engineering friends. These kinds of ways by which you can enhance your job suitability are something which need to come bottom up, self-organized from an institutional point of view, with the institute administration being a very active partner. If you make it mandatory, then you will have a rubber stamp approach to say, yes, it is mandatory, it's done. But it will not actually happen. Let me ask you a rhetorical question. How many of you in the institutions where you come from have a functional daycare center of quality? Just raise your hands, metaphorically, and ask yourself. To have a functional daycare center of quality is mandated. It's required by law, right? And if you go to your university, you will surely find a room which is a daycare center. But does it cater to everyone? Does it cater to most people? Is it of quality? Does it cater to all sections of the university society? There is a lot of variability. So my point is, making it mandatory is important. I'm not saying don't make the daycare mandatory. Make it. But the functionality comes from within the society. So that functionality within your society is very, very important. And that's a partnership. One of the big challenges, by the way, of students and postdocs and young researchers driving these things is that you will not be students for long, you will not be postdocs for long, you will not be early career workers for long. You will transit. So you need to have a mechanism, again, as graduating engineers do, of having an intense and quality program, but which handles such transitions of individuals.
Thank you, Professor Raghavan. One more similar point aligned with this is with respect to the number of PhDs graduating and the postdocs in India, we think that there aren't enough academic positions available. So is there any plan to scale up academic positions in near future?
Thank you. That's a very important and very good question. Now, these are sort of loops which we must break out of. If you look at where 90% of our research funding goes, it goes to 10% of our institutions, mainly central government, universities, and research institutes. So only 10% goes into the state university sector, our research support. So that needs to be increased, and I'll tell you how we're trying to do that. Secondly, if you look at where 90% of our jobs are, as students go, I said they go to the state universities, but the other jobs are also there. So unless the state university sector has opportunities to become hubs of research nationally, unless those are attractive to everyone, we are caught in a loop of the following kind. People come from state universities, brilliant young people. They go to these top national labs and international labs, and their ambition, if they want to go into academics, is to be in these national labs and international labs naturally, right? They don't see state universities, with some notable exceptions, as opportunities. So we have to make those as real opportunities in exciting ways. That's the most important thing. To do that, we have proposed, and it is almost at the final stages when the COVID pandemic came on us, a national research foundation, one of whose components is a major stimulus to the state university system. Now, given all the difficulties now with resources, it will still happen, but it will take a little different slope and catching up. But that said, I don't want to say it is easy. I would urge you, those of you who want to go into academic research, to be more adventurous and go into smaller towns, cities, places, and so on. And I'll give you an example of why I think that's important. And those of you similarly who want to go into industry, I would urge you to be more adventurous, even though there are difficulties in going into industry in multiple ways. We had a discussion in one of our vaccine task forces yesterday, or 2 days ago, and there was a professor from the Mahatma Gandhi Medical Institute in Sevagram who gave a talk on clinical research. Now, this is a small place, it's not a major research institution, but this person's clarity of thought and ability to articulate research programs and get that done was absolutely astounding. There are hundreds and thousands of such people elsewhere. There are hundreds and thousands of research questions in our ecosystem, which are top quality system. We have moved without, I'm not again saying it's unimportant, it's very important, but the bulk of our discussions are on, where can I get my job in these top 10 places? What are the papers I need to do? Will I get my fellowship on time? These are really hard and difficult bread and butter questions. I completely agree. But while doing that, while attending to those, we must also attend to questions about why are we in science? What are the kinds of questions we can answer? And be adventurous in trying to answer them either in academia, industry, or in other jobs.
Thanks. And I will just close this point by one last suggestion, which had come up from our last held National Postdoctoral Symposium. There was a recommendation regarding opening of other fellowships in the non-academic areas. We completely agree that fellowship in the science policy, the DSC Science Policy Fellowship is a very good example in that respect. If there are plans in the government to open many more such fellowships, not only in policy, but other areas like communication and etc. I would end with this point and let Professor Raghavan answer.
Globally, if you look at the kinds of funding for these and other kinds of fellowships, there is a mixture of support for this from central governments, state governments, industry bodies, policy institutions, and so on. So I would reframe your question to say that reframe a request or demand to say that while we should increase these kinds of fellowships, no doubt, we should not expect each and every aspect to come from the government. Government fellowships of these kinds or any other kind should be seen as a instance by which others also can join in, state governments, industry, and everyone else, to make sure these fellowship opportunities are much larger, and that's feasible.
Thank you, Professor Raghavan. I hand it over to Gauri to go to the next point.
Thank you, Aditya, and thank you, Professor Raghavan. The next point for our discussion is on age bar. So age bar of 35 for recruitment at many research institutes has been a concern for many research scholars in India. And this concern is mainly because there is an uncertainty in the time required for completion of PhD and postdoc. There is uncertainty in the delay of publication or delay in recruitment or career breaks, etc. So I request PSA if you can address this issue.
Thank you very much, Gauri. This is a very, very important question. And there is, by the way, no age bar. The age bar, as you call it, is self-imposed by institutions. There's nothing to stop an institution from saying that if you have done this much research, whether during your PhD or after your PhD, we will give you this kind of a position. And therefore, you can hire a person in their 20s if they meet certain minimal requirement, in the 30s, 40s, or 50s. So those kinds of things are there. There are different posts. And therefore, the challenge you're saying is, can I join an entry-level position, right, even though I'm much older, just a little bit older than the rest of the cohort? Can I get, why should there be an upper age limit for an entry-level position? Now, the reason for that, the answer for that comes depending on where you are. If I am someone who faces this problem in applying for an entry-level position, I will argue that there should be flexibility. Many people, unfortunately, on the other side, when they are in an institution, they are faced with another kind of situation. They find that there are applicants, they used to find, it's not so anymore, they used to find that there are applicants who have a certain distribution of age. And therefore, from the institution point of view, some institutions said, we prefer to take younger people because they'll have a longer residence time. Now, I'm not defending that, saying that that's a fair approach, but institutions are using their flexibility to hire people who have a longer residence time. That is the reason. Now, what is happening is another point which you so correctly mentioned. PhD timelines are getting longer, postdoc timelines are getting longer, and therefore what was unusual to have people in their mid-30s coming in for early beginning stage jobs is now becoming the norm. The median application in certain areas of science and technology is very close to this mysterious 35-year-old figure. So clearly there is a big problem over there. So to distill out, there are two problems then. Should there be a 35 barrier? And my view on that is that institutions should examine that in a manner a lot more flexible, right? So that you don't you take people who are older, but you take into account that they had a research experience or a break in career and so on, and have them join. That flexibility should be there. That's not such a big deal. But at the same time, two things need to be done, and that's a very hard thing. This same set of people we are talking to now, when you get jobs in academia, when others previous to you have taken jobs in academia, we should not view our students as factories for generating quality science without paying attention to their quality of life, their career, and their whole intellectual well-being and development. And therefore, pushing them to have a longer and longer PhD residence time is wrong. We must bring that back to a lower period. On that, they will argue, the PIs will argue to their evaluation process, right? But that evaluation process is a self-imposed one. It's not an external one. That can be fixed by the institute. And no matter how skewed or incorrect the evaluation process in science is, it is not an excuse for using that to prolong a PhD. Similarly, it's not an excuse for prolonging a postdoctoral fellowship. I would be a little more radical and say that postdocs are really a temporary holding operation of a year or two, and you should be eligible for jobs after that without looking for significant productivity during a postdoc. That's the way it used to be in zoology in the US, in Europe, in ecological sciences, in mathematics, even now so in engineering, where you get a job after your PhD and you teach and you do your research or you go to industry, and long postdocs or postdocs are unusual rather than the norm. This started changing about 30, 40 years ago when long postdocs started becoming increasingly frequent. And that's really resulted in a skewed pyramid. You have a small number of PIs and a huge workforce meant to service these PIs' ambitions and quality of their science, which is good. That's not going to help in terms of jobs for people who have spent 6 years for a PhD and 6 years for a postdoc, and then you want them to be magically young. That's not correct.
Yeah, that's right, Professor Raghavan. And I hope that there is a scope for all the deserving representation despite of their age. And,
this is a very simple matter. This cannot be solved top down alone. There can be top down encouragement and push. Some institutions must take the lead and say, we will finish our PhDs much faster. And these should be the top institutions, and say, in 4 years, our PhD student will finish. And that same institution should say, we will hire PhD students from all over the world, from India, who are fresh PhD students, and give them career jobs, and where they have the flexibility to take a sabbatical or not. Unless these kinds of things are done by our top institutions, they must take the leadership in this, just as they must take the leadership in career fairs and organization. So then others will follow for sure.
I hope all the institutes make their policies more flexible here onwards. And I hand over the discussion to Aditya for the next point. Over to you, Aditya.
Next point is on fellowship availability and timely disbursement. The problem of delay in receiving fellowship or its activation is evident in many cases. For research scholars, this poses a serious managerial problem. Considering that the current scholars are the future torchbearers of science, this problem needs immediate attention. This issue in particular might seem very repetitive to policymakers, but solving this would bring huge relief to the community, we believe. Both the institutes and the government may have a major role to play here. Can Professor Raghavan share his thoughts on this?
First of all, let me say that there's absolutely no legitimate excuse for delaying a person's fellowship or salary. That should not be the case. And attempts to make this more efficient have gone on for a long time. They have become better, but not good enough. And we need to make sure that they become perfect. What is the reasons for this are important before we start sorting it out. If you were getting only a fellowship and nothing else, right, then it is a relatively straightforward problem to solve because your presence at your workplace can be checked and you can get your fellowship by direct benefit transfer. And the glitches on that would be about availability of resources in a year or not, and there'll be ups and downs. So those are relatively simple. If you are getting a fellowship and a research grant or a contingency, that's where things become a little more complex. Those contingencies and all are valuable. Then your research supervisor, in addition, needs to say that those resources have been got, they're used well. They need to tell your institute whether that has happened. Your institute needs to tell the funding agency. Everything needs to be done perfectly right. And unless all of this is done right the first time, you're not, when you get the initial grant, you get it. For the second time, all of this needs to be done right. Now, this is a process in all of government. You will not get the second installment of something until the first installment is done right. Now, when you look at the kinds of problems people have had, and I've looked at that over years, the sad problem is that no one comes out good in this. Government agencies could do much better in their streamlining and in their functioning of fellowship organization and dispersal and response, no question about that. But when we see what happens, scholars who get the fellowship are often, give their utilization of their contingencies. They do it at the last moment and give it to the guides at the last moment. Their guides sit on it till they're reminded 10 times. Then it goes to the institute. The institute is no more efficient than the scholar or the guides, and they also sit on it. Things go past, then to the agency, who will again have their headaches and their problems and their priorities. There are multiple things over there. And each one of us in the system expects the other person to be more efficient than us. That doesn't work that way. So we clearly need to clean up at every level, from the government level. Certainly, Shekhar Mandey is putting in a lot of effort in CSIR, and that can be exemplary for others to clear up. So that will happen soon. In addition to that, without in any way diminishing the importance of us cleaning up at the government end, we need to have institutional cleaning up in a substantial manner. There's another very important problem, and this is a legal issue which you have to understand. All of us have to understand. The money goes to the institution, right? It goes to the director of the institution, who then gives it to you, your fellowship or your grant or whatever. So from the ministry's point of view, from the government of India's point of view, the institution has signed responsibility and taken that. The finance ministry is agnostic to the point that there are hundreds or thousands of grants in the institute. They look very carefully and said, you got 100 rupees, you have given accounts for utilization of only 60 rupees, you haven't given the accounts for the utilization of other 40, we can't give you your next installment of 100 unless you give this, right? Now, this hurts all those 60 who have done their job. The 40 who haven't done their job are causing the 60 to be in trouble. So year after year, the government makes an exemption for that year and says, okay, from next year onwards, you will do all the 100. And this goes on. And this ranges from the top institutes to the more difficult institutes in more difficult environments. So there's not at that end. Now, this results, again, there should be a mechanism by which the government and also needs to be much more organized and better done. So we should talk about that.
I guess Dr. Akhilesh Gupta wants to add some points on it.
Before that, very quick point, I've got a chat item saying several people are requesting extension of fellowships in the COVID crisis. I will communicate that to the funding agencies and we can see how that can be done. Yeah, Akhilesh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think just to add one more point to what Professor Vijay said, that in fact, when COVID came, I think the direction that we got from the government is that we can hold on with any other things, but not the fellowship amount. So in fact, all the institutions, which are receiving, which are actually having project with GST and institutions who are actually given release of all fellowship, to them. But I understand there are issues at the institutional level because some of the institutions are still closed and they're not able to disburse the fellowship. But from the government side, we did a kind of priority we took and then delivered the money to the institution on fellowship thing. And the other point was Professor Vijay mentioned that extension. So we in fact had given extension to the most of the projects which were asking for, and I think we are quite liberal in that. That we understand that institutions are some of the institutions are not functioning the way they are, so we are very liberal to giving extension to projects. Thank you.
I guess the community considers the effort taken from the funding agency and the probable problems that might lead to delay in fellowships and all. But I just want to reiterate that the ones who are in the lower tiers, that are students, are the most affected in this case. I guess we understand there are things which need considerations like the contingency issue and all, as said by Professor VijayRaghavan. But we can't imagine a professor not getting paid in an institute for many, many months. But that happens quite frequently with the PhD students or sometimes with the postdoc community as well. There might be multiple reasons, as Professor Raghavan said, that there might be reasons which needs to be addressed. There are points, but can't we have a strict regulations or maybe change of a system totally to make sure that the problem is addressed very soon?
Thanks a lot, Aditya. You have addressed a very fundamental issue. And this is a problem in our ecosystem in the way different kinds of jobs are viewed. Some are called jobs, some are called contract appointments, some are called fellowships, others are, for work done and so on. And as one goes, quote unquote, down this pipeline of different kinds of jobs, the system, as it were, looks at the component of resources which are given for the work done in a more and more flexible manner. What you are saying is, why is a fellowship not in the same category as a salary? Now, let me point out two things. It's absolutely true. Government salaries are rarely cut. There are instances, though, in state governments where, salary is cut because of poor, overall budgetary management. And sometimes there are delays and not. That can happen in central government situation too. But it's much, much rarer than the kinds of fellowship problems you see. And this addresses a more fundamental issue. And that's why all of you, when you have jobs of responsibility, you must also address this. Why is it that this problem has been there for years? When you become a faculty member or you become an official in the government, how much of a priority is this? This problem was talked about several years ago, where all those who are talking about it are now in positions in each of those cases I told you, as PIs, as institute administrators, as government servants, to solve it. So, in other words, while we should solve it, and the government indeed has a responsibility significantly to solve it, it should be at much a responsibility within your institution also. The lack of priority of this is as much a problem outside the institution as it is within the institution.
Thank
And
you
you
for
are,
your ideas
and you are
sorry.
the institution. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you for your ideas, Professor Raghavan. May I now request Gauri to move forward to the next point?
Thank you, Aditya. The next important issue is about brain drain. So the competitive fellowships like Ramlingaswamy and Ramanujan are great to attract professionals with global exposure from abroad or from outside India, which allows them to establish their career in India. However, large number of talented professionals do not return to India. So what measures can be taken to provide attractive positions to such scholars? Professor Raghavan.
Thank you. Let me ask you a question. Um, if each of us had a choice to join any institution we wanted, anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, right? What is the kind of institution you would like to go to? Would it be an institution which gives you electricity, water supply, and an empty room? Would it be an institution which welcomes a little more with resources? Would it be an institution where your colleagues are cheerful and are very excited to see you come? Would it be an institution where there are bright students running around everywhere who you want to teach, you're excited about? Or would it be an institution where all these things happen more negatively than positively? So, in other words, leave aside the brain drain part of it, because I'll come to that. That's another point. We are having quality people applying for jobs both from abroad and from India. And we have people who are better fits in other jobs applying for jobs both in India and abroad. So it's not a question of what people from abroad are better or worse, or people from here are better or worse. It's about where they fit in. But my fundamental problem is that the numbers of institutions which are attractive to people from India who have gone abroad, or indeed people from anywhere in the world who want to come and work in India, are few. Now, how do we change that? Now, if you look at some institutions and compare other institutions, you can see how it can be changed. Look at the state universities, right? Now, there are several hundred state universities. And people ask, are they all the same? They're not the same. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, some of them are open, some of them have a work overload, some of them are doing well despite that, some of them are not. So there are places which are still welcoming in a very general manner, even though they have the same problems of funding, rules, regulations, and hassles. Right? The same goes for the IITs. Some IITs are better than others. Some ICERs are better than others. Some central labs are better than others. So we must look at those places which are more welcoming, despite the same hassle. Ask why are they more welcoming and what can we do? So I think the fundamental problem is this, that we undergo metamorphosis. When we are graduate students or postdocs, we talk about how institutions should be more welcoming, PhD programs should be shorter, postdoc period should be shorter, there should not be an age bar, and how institutes should be more forthcoming and welcoming and supportive. The moment we go to the other side of the table, we change dramatically, right? To us, students become those who serve our lab. Postdocs become those who can help us to greater glories. Institutions are mere tools for our ambitions. And, the rest of the world should now look upon you and help you to do even better. And you will then complain about the bureaucracy, the finance ministry, and so on. And when you go and become a bureaucrat in the finance ministry, you'll complain about the students and the institutions. So we must learn to look at problems from other people's perspectives also and work collegially. There is a lot of very correct questioning of what the problems are, by each of us. But we can't do that only from our perspective. We must also do it from the perspective, particularly of those who are quote unquote called subordinates in our ecosystem. If we do that, then we will have institutions which are welcoming of new people and who are really focused on their future rather than your own, that the people who are already inside the institutions.
Thank you very much, Professor Raghavan, for those words. And we have also received few suggestions on this topic. So I will just read those suggestions for you. So some people are saying that there should be exclusive academic fellowships with a scope to spend part of their postdoc tenure in labs outside of India. Then there is one more suggestion which says that increase the fellowship to respectable remuneration. And there is one more suggestion which says that there should be independent grant applications to different funding agencies which is available. Then we can also enhance the quality of postdoctoral training and so on. So these were some suggestions which we just received on social media.
These are all, these are very, very important suggestions, no question. And when you look at the world over and see how these suggestions have been implemented, they've been implemented by a combination of government support, philanthropy, industry support, and so on. To ask a check to be signed for every good idea, right, when we are in a certain position, and then refuse to sign that check for every good idea when you are the other side of the table is not going to get us anywhere. There's an enormous amount of institutional flexibility to provide students and postdocs mechanisms to go abroad or go to the country or go to industry. And there are lots of government programs also for that. Institutions should take these responsibility to connect students and postdocs to these things. It's not the government of India's job to solve every little fellowship issue, not because it should not address these questions. These are important questions, but it results in a mechanism of addressing them which are not context dependent. So my concern is that our interaction, your interaction as young, early career people with your institutions and the institutions wanting to empower you should be a lot more. Institutions and their heads are not only post offices which communicate with you and funding agencies. They are enabling structures. They should have career fairs. They should work with, they should have you teach so that you have experience in teaching. They should have you interact with industry. All these are institutional responsibilities. They are not responsibilities which can be imposed from outside. So all these opportunities which you say are available in the local ecosystem. Institutions should connect with the local ecosystems and get these things going. If you're in small towns, your community will help you. And those interactions need to be there. So I agree that the government needs to look at these kinds of questions, but they need to be looked at it more from the local standpoint also.
Thank you very much, Professor Raghavan, for your inputs. Now I hand over to Aditya for the next point.
Thank you, Gauri. At one point, with respect to one suggestion with respect to the previous point, or rather a question to Professor Raghavan, we agree that there has a lot to be done with government, institutions, and students, where institutions also play a very major role. How do we motivate or pass the message to the institutions, or is there a way we can approach to make institutions work in a way that we have been discussing?
This would have been a very frustrating challenge last year to answer how this can be done. But the collateral consequence of the COVID pandemic is that the institutions have responded, some at least, many of them, have responded in a manner where the communication between all sections is much better. Communication with society and industry is much better. This needs to be embedded in it. So typically, the good ones which have a lot of interactions and response are those which have a large body of students, undergraduate and postgraduate, right? those kinds of institutions have a greater responsibility, and some of them do really well in handling it. Institutions which have only postgraduate students have a tendency to become more isolated and not more interactive. And therefore, it's important that they work with the city, with other institutions to form a cluster which can do this. We are trying to push the development of national cluster institutions in cities. And that kind of interactive mode will allow both, more synergistic science being done, but also jobs in localities so that early jobs are available to people because of this kind of a synergy.
Those were important words, Professor Raghavan. The next point which I'm going into, Professor Raghavan has already said a bit about it and it's important. I wish to reiterate those points. Events like National Postdoctoral Symposium was able to bring postdocs from different parts of the country. It was noticed that research scholars from so-called elite institutions get better exposure, training, and infrastructure support compared to some of the so-called non-elite institutions, universities, which also includes state universities. We believe iSTEM is one such initiative which has aimed at bridging the gap of accessibility of the research infrastructure, and we appreciate that. Further, in the interest of the community, how can these differences be minimized?
There are. Thank you, Aditya. This is an interesting point. There is a view that institutions which are doing better on certain fronts are doing better because they are richer, or they are lucky to have someone who does things in a different way, or the government interferes less with them, or they have a better working relationship, they're doing things right, and these are the kinds of things. I think while there will certainly be truth in each of these arguments or not, the problem is a more fundamental cultural one. Do you, as a student, as a postdoc, as an early career researcher, and the institute have a shared sense of purpose, right? And the institution instill that, and do you have that? If you're seeing your institution as a halfway house alone, then there is a problem that the institution has not conveyed its full possibility to you. So I would say that there's a much greater need for institutions to be, as an institution, to be more imaginative in terms of getting solutions rather than being a collection of individuals. See, there are some significant changes which have happened now, which allow institutions to connect with their society and do well. Corporate social responsibility, which every company has to give on their post-tax revenue of 2% they have to give at least, is now open to research institutions and to incubators. And this was done about 8-9 months ago by us. We pushed it. How many institutions have, and this has been told to all the institutions, how many institutions have used this to advantage? Your small local businesses which are doing well, which have profits, which can now give for research. They can give for all the fellowships which you talked about, travel here, travel there, and so on. That requires an active office to do that. It will not magically happen that someone will give. It will happen in some big institutions where there are famous alumni, but smaller institutions can also do that. They can also partner with industry for research. So we must look at ways of getting resources and flexibility both from government but also from outside. That's an institutional job.
More specifically, adding on to that point, how do we make a good industry-university collaboration? What are the specific roles, if you can just say, from the institution side, from the student side, and also from the government side?
Well, if you'd asked me this 5 years ago, I would have given a lecture. Now I would just say, go and see what IIT Delhi is doing, what IIT Madras is doing, what IIT Bombay is doing. Extraordinary interactions of students, faculty, and others in their startup ecosystem on scale. Our national labs need to be part of such interactions, much more. Some of them have got good interactions, but they need to scale up enormously. So there are really good things happening in some locations really well. The NITs also have these kinds of programs. It's amazing to see how many of them are getting genuinely complex problems to solve from industry. So if you look at the engineering space, the software space, there are lots of interactions like this. So this needs to be pushed in other sciences too, in material science, in physics, in chemistry, and biology. And given the pandemic, there are these kinds of interactions with industry can now be global. It's no longer considered unusual for you as a graduate student to advise a top company in Boston about what to do. That capability must be there within the internal pool and must be facilitated by the institute. Company in Boston doesn't care whether you're getting advice from Nagarkoil or Kashmir. They want quality advice. They don't care which institution you are from. If you can give quality advice, quality decision making, quality designs, the world is yours. So these kinds of new approaches, in addition to genuinely and valuably beating old horses to make them move, good idea, but the new approaches must also be taken.
Sure, Professor Raghavan. One suggestion to probably sort of try to bridge the gap between the non-elite and elite university, can a program which promotes the exchange of students between the so-called non-elite or state universities mandatorily with the elite universities, can that try to solve that issue to some extent? That was one suggestion. The other was, can increase of funding for the projects which involves inter-institutes mandatorily, so maybe a state university and one elite university facilitate this?
So the short answer is that there are already such programs. The DST has started these kinds of programs some years ago. The new National Research Foundation aims to enhance it hugely. There's no shortage of means by which smaller colleges and universities can use larger places for resources. There's also what's called the iSTEM portal, where equipment all over the country is available. If you want to go and use that, anyone can go and use it. The problem is that when we have these very valuable discussions, we think and ask for solutions which may be to some extent already there, but our institutions don't use them sufficiently. And as individuals, we perhaps don't use them sufficiently. So it will be good to explore those also and see what the mapping is. Are there some deficiencies in the programs that they're not being used well? Are they being used well and not enough? Or, are more needed, are different needed? So this has to be done. And again, from bottom up effort, that information would be very, very valuable.
Raghavan, I hand it over to Gauri for the next point.
Thank you, Aditya, and thank you, Professor Raghavan. One more important concern raised was lack of diversity, particularly in aspects of differently abled persons and the gender. So speaking first of differently abled persons, I would like to mention that this issue was raised by Anushri Sapkarkar. She is a postdoc from IISER Pune. She asked that how can science education and research be made more accessible in India? And most institutes are still not accessible to people with locomotory and other disabilities. Most of the postdoc fellowships require one to switch their institutes, but there is no special consideration given to people with disabilities. I request PSA to please address this issue.
Thank you, Gauri. this is a very important point, and kudos to Anushri for keeping at it. I would first address that. Legally, the situation is that all institutions must be accessible to disabled. And therefore, all the access, ability to attend and function should be maximally put in place. That's a legal requirement. And this is not just for educational institutions, research institutions everywhere. That, again, feedback from the community is important. Are those being implemented? If not, why? So that constant feedback is absolutely necessary. Now, the issue of inclusion and diversity is a very important one. The very valuable change which has come over in the last few decades is the diversity of young people coming into research. And this has been very positive. Both gender diversity and diversity of all other kinds, economic, social, minorities have increased significantly at the entry level. The challenge has been that this diversity is less and less seen as one goes up. And this is because of a variety of reasons. And systemic ceilings and glass ceilings are in no small measure matters to be addressed. And these are matters which some of them have been addressed legally already, but they need to be now implemented institutionally. There again, I would urge our top institutions should show the route. If you look at our topmost research institutions and universities, you can go through their websites and see how many people they have hired over the last 10 years, which makes for this kind of a diversity. And the figures are not very encouraging in some of these top places. They're better actually in some of the smaller places. What is the reason for that? I think both top places and small places and others don't go out of their way to find out and encourage people of different kinds in science as well as in society to apply. They typically look at people who happen to come by. And this is a self-fulfilling spiral of an institute's culture where you become more and more of one kind and less of diverse kinds. Here again, institutional leadership should be more daring and inclusive in a proactive manner. Some institutions do a good job of having a map saying, look, here are finishing PhD students who potentially can come and get jobs in my place in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. And they follow them up. And they have an inclusion agenda also there. But very few really do that well.
Okay, so moving to the second part of this topic, it is about unequal representation of women or impaired gender ratio, which is a major concern in the field. So although efforts are being taken towards making equal representation of females, the ratio is still unfavorably skewed at many places in India, across many domains. And many female students suffer from career gap after PhD or postdoc due to various issues and personal commitments. So what measures can be taken to have adequate representation of women in science?
Again, we should look at examples of some institutions which have done a good job, and they're literally a handful. Typically, institutions will give you reasons why they're changing, but it will take time, right? They will talk about cumulative nature of people already there. They will say that, they didn't get applications. They'll say that, if there are 10 people being promoted, candidates for one position, and let's say one of them is a woman, they will say that the probability is 1 in 10 in any case. So all sorts of such reasons will be given. They are all, essentially going to postpone the problem. Yani Tislan-Follard, a Nobel Prize winner, we had invited her a few years ago, and she has been pioneering in looking at gender equality in Germany. And she was asked a question about what is the likelihood, what is the timeline where you're going to see gender equality in science, much more. And she was very strongly criticized for a wrong answer, for an answer she gave. But what she said was that it will take a very, very long time or will never happen. This was taken to mean that she's against it happening. That was not the case. She was highlighting she's extremely for it to happen, but she was highlighting the extraordinary challenges. These things change easily unless over a very short period, women are in decision-making systems in institutions in a significant capacity. In those institutions where there are jobs available at decision-making positions, proactively women should be brought in. And if they are not there, or if they can't be brought in for a variety of reasons, real or imaginary, then the institution should still take their role in decision-making. This needs to change substantially. uh, I mean, coupled with all the other kinds of ceilings which are present for other, uh, uh, also, all of that needs to go. It's an enormous challenge, but all the more reason to start now.
So can we have a less gender bias in recruitment and grant assessment committees in this regard?
Of course, we can and we should. And our effort in everything, for example, in the STIP policy, is to address that front on, to make sure that the people involved um, are come from a diverse set of geographies, socioeconomic areas, other diversity, and women also. So that needs to be done over there. Then you have inputs coming in more and more. Absolutely, it's very important.
So just now, Bidisha from social media has requested a review by government authorities to push institutions to ensure gender equality. So she has suggested a review system from government.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part. What did she say?
So just now from social media, we have got a suggestion from Vidisha. She has requested a review system by government authorities to push institutions to ensure gender equality.
Absolutely. I do agree that this should be a constant review and feedback mechanism to keep all of us at every level on our toes on this. It's a very important matter. Both formal structures as well as feedback from the community are both very, very important.
Thank you, Professor. Now I request Aditya to move on to the next point for discussion. Over to you, Aditya.
Aditya, how much time do we have? I thought
30 more minutes.
Ouch. Okay. Go ahead.
So amongst our points, we have one more point, and then we directly go on to the questions from the social media and YouTube live chat. So I hear that there are quite a people in YouTube chat who are interested to know about the mental health issues and possible recommendations regarding that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to see the YouTube chat right now, so excuse all the participants for that. But let me frame the question. So it is now well accepted that mental health problems are not uncommon amongst research scholars. The problems may arise for many reasons. To state a few, these may include skewed work-life balance, monetary instability, sexual and mental harassment, inequality at workplace, and others. Lack of mental toughness can further aggravate the suffering. While the problems can be multifactorial and individual dependent and may need local interventions, can some regulations at the policy level help to reduce the intensity of the problem? What possible role can a PhD supervisor or a mentor play in this aspect? Professor Raghavan, if you can answer that.
There are three different components over here. One is what does an organization do? Does it enhance a problem? Does it ignore it? Or does it minimize it? And this is true for every kind of a problem, and mental health well-being is a particularly important one. It is not a problem peculiar to science. It's a problem which is common to all work environments, and it's a problem which is there all over the world. This aspect needs to be stressed and amplified, because if I go to my boss with a broken arm, unhesitatingly I'll be advised to go to the hospital and get it fixed and work in a manner which allows that arm to be fixed, and I will get all the consideration. But if I go with a issue which is a stress or a mental related issue, I don't get the same level of obvious understanding, right? Uh, and therefore, this is a problem of all communities all over the world. Therefore, mental health should come to center stage in terms of our acceptance that all of us, each one of us, at some time or the other in our lives, are going to feel extremely um, stressed in one way or the other mentally. At that time, we will need our friends, our colleagues, our institutions to stand by us. And that mechanism should be a natural mechanism, just as we have them standing by us in terms of other more obvious health issues. And this is a cultural change which must come in, combined with a um, uh, change in the ways we interpret policies. The policies for these are already there in many contexts. With those are policies which need to be implemented institutionally. And institutional leadership showing how it can be done is very important.
We agree, Professor Raghavan, but the concern is, can't strict regulation at the policy level may gradually help in making a cultural change? We totally agree that the institution has to take the major responsibility and the role in it. But if we have to ask a direct question, can't there be a strict mandate or a rule from the government side, which you have already stated that even if we have a mandate or a rule, it might not be implemented in 90% of the institutions, but can't that help institutions get more rigid and motivated to do that?
No, but that is, in terms of health in general, those mandates are already there about what kinds of flexibilities are there with a health issue. You're asking for a specific mention in addition to mental health, right? My point is those are important, just as physical disabilities and access are important. All those fall under the rubric of a mandate which already exists, and therefore it needs to be implemented.
For example, can't government propose for a mandatory counseling cell in each of the universities, supported by the institutions and students for sure? But I may not be aware, but is there a rule for a mandatory counseling cell in each of the universities, and including private institutions?
There are such counseling centers in many institutions where there are a large number of undergraduates. They fall under, again, the rubric of what is required institutionally for ensuring the well-being of your community at large. So those things are absolutely there. I'm just concerned about view that we state a problem and says, well, let the government solve it. It can help. Sometimes it can solve. I'm not so convinced that that is a sufficient rule.
Thank you, Professor Raghavan.
So now I continue to one more important issue which we had left in the fellowship issue. So many postdoctoral fellows have posted this question on social media and on discussion forum on this science policy website. And the issue is like, unlike the category of salaried persons who get other benefits such as PF, health insurance coverage, etc., and who can afford to pay income taxes, the postdoctoral fellowships do not entail such additional benefits and are similar to student fellowships, but are taxable. So most of the postdoc fellows are requesting that their fellowships to be exempted from tax. So Professor Raghavan, what do you suggest on this issue?
I'm going to be a little frank on this. Um, my feeling is we must, as citizens, understand the purpose of tax. India has a very small number of people who pay tax in our general population. They support the growth of the country in multiple different ways. Sadly, we are a country where even if one gets a fellowship, that and even if it is irregular, it's very sad, but that catapults us to amongst the richest brackets in the country. Leave aside the outliers who are very rich, but those who have an income, a place to stay, and some kind of food are very well to do in our country. It's our job not to look at those who are better off than us and say, why can't I get the same kind of benefits and privileges? That is a natural human tendency, right? Everyone wants to have the benefits which someone else has. No one says that they should have the same benefits as us and we should all come a peg lower. So, my feeling is that this is a challenge, but it should be looked upon from the point of view of what the role of money in government ventures and policies and actions are. Um, we need to see how many of those there are in our society who are far, far worse than us. And those are the kinds of questions we as young people should be asking. Uh, it's very important for us to have oxygen, for us to help others. No question about that. But the bulk of our questions cannot be, what can you do for me? Right? The bulk should be, what can I do for a broader ecosystem? Then all these other things are enabling. And there we are partners. We are not that government is preventing you from getting your fellowship on time or would like to tax you no matter what or doesn't those are discussions which one has to improve the oxygen to you so that you think of broader questions. So that's what I would urge that we do.
Okay, so can they have the facilities like medical insurance schemes and all in this case?
Absolutely. Many institutions have got insurance schemes of their own with private insurance agencies where you contribute to those insurance agencies and get medical institutions. There's nothing to stop other institutions from doing that. But remember, the world of government institutions and the world which we are talking into now is a very small world. Just as I said, we must attend to 90% state universities, bulk of whom are not there in this conversation. We must also attend to a variety of programs nationally in health, in social development, and social requirements, which require enormous amount of investment. And therefore, if each group looks at investment only from their perspective and doesn't take a balanced view, that, I mean, there's nothing wrong in asking for things for each of our tribes, each of our, cohorts, each of our groups. That's human nature. But that can't be the dominant theme in every debate.
Thank you, Professor Raghavan, for your comments on this. So now we move on to our unique questions from other social media platforms. And I would request Aditya to start this. If there are any questions on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, other social media platforms. Aditya, over to you.
Thank you, Gauri. Well, there are many of the questions which has been either discussed or addressed or ideated already, which have been asked in the social media platforms like Twitter. one of the person in the discussion forum has asked is like, during the revision of the fellowships, there was a talk of making this a permanent structure and keep it with the rising inflation pace. So has that already taken place? The name is not there, but it has come in the discussion forum.
Again, these are good questions, important questions, and those are matters which will be discussed and resolved. The COVID crisis puts an interesting set of new challenges. Let's go forward to other topics rather than only the very important ones of, what can the government do for me? Let's share some ideas about what can you do for the country.
There are few people like Jave, Aman, and Dipali who are suggesting to create more administrative positions and remote teaching positions. Is it feasible?
That's a very good idea, and I think that's feasible. I think the bright young students here and postdoctoral fellows can be teachers for the whole world. They can also be teachers for the whole of India. They can take the best teaching material from all over the world, translate them into Indian languages, and become, teachers for the country. They can start their companies in these kinds of areas. They can raise money for their own research through these ventures. These are exciting things, absolutely.
Okay. So Jai, Amandeep, and Dipali from YouTube and other platforms are saying that policies should be there to ensure balance of funding and focus on basic, applied, and translational sciences. So can we have a balance between these three aspects?
One of the things which the COVID pandemic has taught us is we're looking for the solution to a problem. We're not looking at, what is the basic science aspect I can get into ventilator design, right? I want to look at the distribution of oxygen through a valve as a basic question because I want to work on the pandemic. People got together and said, can I make a ventilator for a fraction of the cost? Mathematicians, metallurgists, biologists, medical people got together. This is an example of getting together for an applied problem. There are no shortage of examples of getting together for a fundamental problem. And these are climate change, environment, ecology, big science, space research, and so on. So my feeling is one, lots problems in terms of the importance of the question asked and not whether it's basic or applied. Basic or applied are not two categories of science. There are two other categories of science which are very important: good science and bad science. Good science can be of any kind, bad science can also be of any kind. We should encourage good science and reduce bad science.
Thank you, Professor. And many inspired fellows are flooding their questions on YouTube, and they are asking about opportunities and platforms as a guest faculties post-COVID crisis.
Yeah, I agree. I think not just Inspire, but other people also. The biggest opportunity in India is opening up, as I said, teaching and research to people all over the country. In truly innovative ways, you can have research programs and not just teaching programs for people in colleges and our state universities. A lot of that can be anchored in experiment, which is possible locally, but also in theory and in computer science in a big way. So I would urge us to collaborate, not just say, can my college collaborate with the university? What's the government's program? But say, as individuals, as graduate students and postdocs, here is a complicated problem. Can I collaborate with someone in Nagpur and get this done? And we will do this. There's very exciting possibilities there. And equipment and resources are important components, but usually it's good ideas which start off and get good solutions too.
Thank you, Professor, for all your suggestions and all your inputs. And I hope all the research institutes, national, state universities, and everyone implements all these policies which are already in place. And now I hand over the charge to Chagul. Over to you, Chagul.
Oh, thank you so much, Gauri. Just for the interest of time, we are not taking those 1,000+ comments and questions that have come up in the YouTube. I was keeping my video off to try to get a sense of how do we do it. But then, thankfully, Aditya and Gauri had a good grasp of overall topics under umbrella sections, and they pointed out already. So now we are in the segment 4 of this session, which is discussing the summary of this discussion and then asking Professor VijayRaghavan and Dr. Akhilesh Gupta to give a way forward with respect to this particular policy. Because this policy is not just for the short term, it is to have the futuristic outlook when our young scholars are going to run the entire STA ecosystem of the country, not just for India, but also globally, they are going to have an impact. So how this policy will make an impact from what we have discussed and what the issues that have come up. I saw that there are issues ranged from increase of fellowship, regulatory issues, institutional mechanisms, and some mandates, sticks and carrots, and all that came up. Let me begin with Dr. Akhilesh Gupta for his way forward and how this policy can help address, and then I'll come to Professor VijayRaghavan and for his way forward and concluding remarks. Over to you, Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, thank you, Shagun. In fact, this is indeed a very insightful discussion that we had. We could have gone on and on, but the time constraint always there. I think so. This discussion is taking place at the right juncture when we are coming up with the first draft of the policy. So we are shortly going to come up. I think the suggestions that have come, we are going to in fact address some of them, and we shortly going to have the first draft put on the websites of DSTE, Office of PSA, and also Science Policy Forum website, and also MyGov. So you can look for this first draft coming up maybe in a fortnight from now. And you can give your comments, even otherwise, whatever you want to say. So basically, what we had is not end of things. It is a beginning of your engagement with us. So you please keep sending your suggestions and ideas. In fact, we are looking for big ideas. As Professor Vijay said, there's suggestions like minor things here and there, fine, but we are looking for some big ideas which changes the entire science and technology ecosystem in the country. So that's the thing that we are looking for. Well, I think this has been a kind of very interesting discussion that we had, and in fact, I personally thank Professor Vijay for being here. This is, as I said, this is one-time opportunity for not for the students and for even for us to listen to him. It is always pleasure to listen to him, his ideas and vision. So I think I once again thank everybody and say that we are, as I said, this is the beginning of the interaction that we have, and we look forward to your suggestion and comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. I think like what Professor VijayRaghavan corrected me in the town hall, that this is not the one time, I think, opportunity. Professor Vijay likes to actually engage more and more with such engagements. I'm sure before he does that, I've highlighted that. Over to you, Professor Vijay, to have a way forward and to take this in a very constructive way.
Thank you very much, Shagun. And thank you all, Akhilesh, everyone else, for organizing this, and for all of you for being here, both on the YouTube chat and on social media. There is absolutely no question the value that such interactions bring to us within government in getting your feedback. And I completely see how much value the quality of your work you're doing, your ideas have for taking science forward in every aspect of our society, the country, and the world. I also see the great concerns one has about aspects of one's career trajectory, fellowship, and so on. These are processes, again, which need to be smoothened out, both at the policy level and at the implementation of policy. With these two in place, that is the value you bring and the smoothing of processes, which is a tough job which will be done. Remember two things. One, you will transit every year, you will be a year older and you will transit into positions of responsibility. So in the period of 2 or 3 years, even as this policy starts getting implemented, you will be the implementer of these policies. And you will be having webinars with students and they will be asking you all sorts of things, and you will get upset with it because they're talking about fellowships, but you're talking about bigger, brighter, greater things. So I completely agree that the fellowship issues need to be addressed, the job issues, the career path should be addressed, but those are matters which we should work from the government within institutions and make sure that they do that. That should be enabling for another set, and that's something which we should do in the next year or two, is to put younger people, earlier career stage people, into independent jobs in a manner where they can do as they please. Women, those who take career break, will need much more flexibility than others. Age should not be an entry criterion. Quality should be, and there should be multiple kinds of jobs which are available in each realm of quality. So opportunity should be widespread. All of those kinds of issues can be addressed. Remember, there's also a retirement age, so institutions will, of course, try and get people who have a longer residence time, and those kinds of issues should be balanced. Simply put, the answers are that we have enormous challenges, enormous solutions which are feasible, but we need a diversity of kinds of institutions in our environment, public, private, industry, NGOs working on these complex problems. As more and more jobs come about through these and through our state universities, the opportunities for different kinds of jobs will also naturally present themselves and will move away from being a mere debate. So I really look forward to see how in these very demanding times we can take new routes which are not just radical for the sake of being radical, but really impact on the quality of work being done and increase opportunities for all of you and for everyone else in the ecosystem. So thank you very, very much again. And I look forward to having other discussions. And Shagun, Akhilesh, and I and others are always there in case you want to give any more feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Vijay. So just a final segment now, the last few minutes, where I'm going to just capture and say what has actually happened in the 2 hours, because we saw a range of topics ranging from somebody putting comments like, can I change my PhD topic, to something like my UCSC submission has the issue with the because our institutionals are not functioning, how do we progress, to some of the larger policy paradigm shift topics, such as can individual postdocs and PhDs be a PI and submit for funding proposals. That's something kind of a policy change that is expected. I think those also has come up, and channels to increase industry engagement for early career researchers. I think some of the great topics, great ideas, and some of the larger issues are captured in this discussion. We have taken note of all of this. Like Dr. Akhilesh Gupta and Professor Vijay said, this is completely a decentralized participatory process that we are doing. So if you feel there are some points that are not captured in this discussion, or in addition to this, there are other issues that you want to bring it up with respect to STIP 2020 policy making, please do reach out to us. There are multiple channels open. There are 6 activities in Science Policy Forum webpage that you have been already seeing, through which you are engaging now. There is also an active discussion forum. Just to want to make it very clear that the discussion forum was not only for this particular event. The discussion forum remains forever. So even after this session, whatever ideas that you have, whatever suggestions that you have, please curate them and give them in a format where that can be directly taken up for this policy formulation and drafting. With that, I think some of the great ideas that came up, such as having a review framework in institutions for mental health and for equity and inclusion at the institutional level and at the states level, and how to increase state university students' participation in activities like this and in broader symposiums like what Aditya and Gauri did it in National Postdoctoral Symposium events, because exposure is a very important aspect when it comes to early career trajectories, isn't it? And one of the important points that we touched upon is lack of platforms for what the so-called non-elite institutions to come forward, particularly with respect to the current situation where there are no conferences, there are no physical meetings. So the cross exchange of ideas are not happening at the early stage of PhDs and postdoc, given this current year is stuck with this. So I think we should be able to do something about it. There is a strong recommendation to run virtual conferences at least with the help of some of the government agencies. I'm sure Dr. Gupta can take up this and suggest few. I think already DST is having the 50th year anniversary, so that we can also have something of that sort. So with all these great ideas, let me go to thank everyone who made this event possible. Let me thank everybody who joined. There are at least 3,000 people online right now, the very moment that we are speaking. Thank you so much, everyone who joined and shared your views and aspirations and ideas. Thank you so much, Professor Vijay. Thank you so much, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, for your time. And thanks, Gauri and Aditya, for the wonderful moderation and curated discussions. And thank you, Dennis and Amrita and Sridivya, who are all doing the social media moderation, keeping the fort intact, sitting in all the social media platforms to make sure everything comes to this live. With that, we'll end this session. Please engage with us. If you have any ideas, if you want to do any more sessions, this is completely a decentralized process, the way how National Postdoctoral Fellows Association has taken up this activity, collaborated with us and run it parallelly. So such decentralized activities are more and more welcome. If you have ideas, please reach out to us. With that, thank you so much. And we can end this live session here. Thank you so much. Dennis, over to you. Professor Vijay and Dr. Gupta, please stay on for a minute just for a photograph. Dennis will end the live session and we'll take a photo here. Thank you. Dennis, can you respond?
1 second, hold on.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just in a train mode, so I was a little fast. Sorry for that.